And welcome to lecture number 12. Number 12, we will continue with looking at Southern Africa. Yesterday, in the last lecture, we looked at South Africa and talked about Nelson Mandela. Today, we're going to continue to look at the historical theory of great men. That is the great man theory of history. Okay, so we looked at South Africa yesterday. South Africa, easy one to remember because the name tells you its location. We're going to compare South Africa with Zimbabwe. We'll talk just briefly about Lesotho and Eswatini. Eswatini just changed its name about 18 months ago. It used to be Swaziland, and you'll still see Swaziland quite a bit. But is now Eswatini. The leader of Eswatini objected that Swaziland, the name looked too much like Switzerland, and he was afraid that people would get the two mixed up, which sounds kind of silly. But that was what he had to say. And we'll just mention in passing Madagascar. Okay? So that's what we're going to take a look at today. Let's start with Zimbabwe. Hey, Zimbabwe, you may have heard it called Rhodesia. It was named after a guy named Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes, a guy who had all kinds of adventures in his life. All right, in the 1880s, this was the big drive to colonize Africa. And any young man that wanted to have an adventure was heading off for Africa to be involved in that. And Cecil Rhodes was one of these young, studly guys who wanted to go off and make his fortune. And being British, he went to South Africa, which was controlled by Britain, and wanted to get in on the diamonds and wanted to get in on the gold. And unhappily discovered he got there a little bit late. Most of the good claims were already filed and the diamond market was already controlled, and he was bummed because he came there to make a fortune. So he decided I'll look someplace else. So he got some trade goods, and he took a little trip up north of what was settled and moved into what is now known as Zimbabwe. He's looking for gold. And he finds a little bit, he thinks, whoa, there could be more here. So he goes to the local chief and he signs a treaty. He gives the chief all these trade goods. In return, he asks the chief to sign a piece of paper that says they could dig some holes on his property. Well, the chief thinks, yeah, this is great. Sure, I'll take your cool stuff and you can dig a few holes. So Cecil Rhodes gets this treaty. Then he comes back to South Africa, goes to the British governor, and he says, listen, governor, I have already made a peace treaty with the African chief of this area. So there's no problem with war. There might be gold up there, don't know, but I'd like your permission to go up there and settle. And the governor said, yeah, sure, it'll get you out of here. And so Rhodes goes and gets with a bunch of these other settlers that have gotten there late. And he says, come on, it looks like there might be gold up there. Come with me. So he goes back up into what is now Zimbabwe and sets up a settlement. They don't find any gold, at least not very much. What they do find is really productive soil. And so they basically start farming. The African chief that they signed a treaty with is not too excited about everything. He says, right, you're just going to dig some holes. What, all these white people coming up here. And yeah, they did have to fight some wars with the black Africans. However, spear against a gun is going to win anytime. They named the colony Rhodesia after Cecil Rhodes, and it becomes fairly prosperous up there. They get more and more people moving in. Finally, they get big enough population. In 1922, they become a self-governing colony. Still a colony under Great Britain, but self-governing in that case. So they're not taking their orders from South Africa. Okay, so we get to the era of decolonization. and Britain is looking at getting um, out of Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, then Rhodesia, looking at getting out of that. But they want to leave it in such a way that it is done orderly and that the rights of the Africans, the Black Africans, are respected. Well, the white population sees what they're doing, that they're talking about one man, one vote, and immediately see this Black population is going to way outnumber us. And, well, we like being in charge. And so before Britain can pull out in an orderly way, the white population simply declares their independence and draws up their own constitution, which looks a lot like apartheid that's going on down in South Africa. Okay, so the Black population, who had been looking forward to this orderly withdrawal where they would be left with the vote, they get rather upset. And we have many years of war between the minority white population and the majority Black population. I was kind of tickled when I moved to Endicott. I discovered a lady that was from Rhodesia, later becomes Zimbabwe, but she was from Rhodesia. She had been raised there, and she was an expert with dogs, and she actually fought in these wars against the Black Africans that were trying to take over. She was so good with dogs that she trained dogs to go out along the roads to kind of sniff out landmines. She had some interesting stories to tell, quite a gal. Well, eventually the white population is going to be defeated, so they make a deal with the rebels and say, hey, just leave us our stuff, we can go along with the political changes. Well, the guy that becomes prime minister is a man named Robert Mugabe, big, strong, tall guy, who was one of the guerrilla leaders. But there were so many different guerrilla bands that were fighting against the white population that Mugabe, first thing he had to do was defeat these other bands. And so the first few years of him being in charge, he didn't do anything, didn't do too much with the white population because he needed their taxes and that kind of stuff. But he ended up killing thousands of his opponents. This was black on black violence in a big, big way. And eventually he defeated all of the opposition in a rather bloody campaign. However, Mugabe now has a whole bunch of soldiers that have been fighting for him, and they want some kind of pay, some kind of restitution for having spent their lives fighting for Mugabe, and Mugabe doesn't have anything to give them. So it is this point that he turns on the white farmers. He begins to confiscate white farms. He will take a very productive, large, white-owned farm. It's been there for ages. He takes it, he cuts it up in little 40-acre plots and gives it to one of his soldiers. Well, the soldier now has a farm, but he doesn't know how to be a farmer. He has no seeds, no tractors, no know-how. All of that has disappeared. The white flight out of Zimbabwe is huge. The whites realize handwriting's on the wall. I better take what I can take and get out of here. Well, these are the people that know how to run the farms. These are the people who know how to run the factories. They also take as much of their wealth with them as they can, and the country begins to fall apart economically. The factories close up, the agriculture totally crashes. This leads to even more unhappiness with Mugabe among the population. But Mugabe's still got soldiers, he's still got an army, and he controls what's left of the economy. When they have a drought come through, Mugabe sends no food to those areas of the country that don't support him. Basically ruins the country. There's famine. The inflation gets to the point that the money is worthless. The water systems all break down, so you have disease outbreaks, cholera, which you shouldn't have cholera, but when you don't have good clean water, yeah, you're going to get cholera. You have a large percentage of the the Zimbabwe population actually leaves the country. They can find no work in Zimbabwe, so they leave the country and send remittances back to their families to stay behind. But eventually, even many of the families just leave Zimbabwe. Remittance is money that a person goes to another country, earns money, and sends the money to their families. So remittance. Well, he screws things up so badly that finally he is ousted. 2017, he finally resigns. Actually, what he tried to do is to put his wife in his place. But the powers that be said, no, 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 you're not going to fool us. You're going to try and rule through your wife. No, we want you out. Well, he left and left with a whole bunch of money that should have belonged to Zimbabwe. He finally died 2019 here, just last year. Finally, this guy's dead. He actually died in Singapore in this high-priced private hospital. Yeah, he was pretty much a jerk. So what I want you to do is to contrast, in thinking about the great man theory, contrast a Mugabe with a Mandela. Okay? Mandela, who saves the country from the white flight, from all the violence that is pushed, with a Mugabe who totally screws up his country. Great man theory, very much in evidence. Okay, let's go back, look at the map, and I'll talk briefly about another couple of countries here. Okay, Lesotho and Eswatini. Okay, Lesotho right here, landlocked country surrounded by South Africa, and Eswatini over here. Eswatini, okay. Both of them have kind of a similar background. They were established by tribes that were fleeing from Shaka Zulu. Okay, Shaka Zulu was kind of the African Napoleon. He was kind of up here. And by all accounts, he is like the greatest warrior ever. And his armies are conquering everything around him. And the people of Lesotho and Eswatini decide, yeah, we can't fight him, we're leaving. And so they leave in the early 1800s and set up country, or set up their own little establishments in what is now, what is South Africa. Okay, so they kind of part ways. They don't really intermingle with each other. Lesotho and Eswatini both, however, eventually become British colonies, sort of, pretty much in name only. The British really don't have much to do with them. They're far away, small populations, not much there. They're pretty much left on their own until finally the two countries in 1966, they both end being British colonies and become independent countries. Sort of independent countries, at least in the case of Lesotho. Lesotho, as you can imagine, depends on South Africa. South Africa, much bigger country, much stronger economically. Lesotho, much, much smaller. There's only about 2 million citizens of Lesotho. In fact, South Africa, during their apartheid, uses Lesotho to say, okay, all of you Black Africans, you guys are part of Lesotho. And they do give some money to the leadership of Lesotho to kind of take them in. But Lesotho really has very little economy of its own. So they depend on South Africa and on remittances from their people going into South Africa to work. Lesotho's history after independence is not great. There was military coup after military coup. There was civil war. They got involved with the communist, anti-communist routine. The communists tried to get people in there and get a communist country going there. That didn't work. But the whole thing has been really brutal, really bloody. It wasn't until 2002 they finally had their first democratic elections. And then 2010, we had the HIV virus go ripping through there. It was estimated that 1/4 of the population has HIV. Just not much of a country. They never had a strong man to really pull it together. They had no Robert Mugabe like Zimbabwe did. Strong man screwed up the country. They had no Nelson Mandela in South Africa to help save the country. Lesotho basically was and still is something of a basket case. As far as their economy, mostly agricultural, a little bit of mining. Actually, some American firms have started setting up factories there to serve the East Asian market because the wages are so low. Levi Strauss is in there. The Gap is in there. So yeah, a little bit of manufacturing going on, but Lesotho had no great man to give them direction. So what about Eswatini? Now, Eswatini is an interesting little country. When I was running around in South Africa, I spent a couple days in Eswatini. It was odd. In South Africa, we always felt kind of a tension because the crime rate is so high, because there's still racial discord going on. We were always very careful. Our hotels that we stayed in South Africa really looked like fortresses. They had walls around it with barbed wire on the top. There was always a tension. When we came into Eswatini and we went through customs, and it felt different. It just felt like this tension kind of melted away. We went to a museum and I noticed the park just across the way there. Black families happily playing, white families happily playing, certain amount of intermingling going on. We went to a restaurant that was out on the sidewalk restaurant. And we were sitting there eating our lunch, and the owner came out just to check on things. A nice black lady came out and asked how things were going. And one of our groups said, "Would you mind talking to us about your country?" And she sat down and said, "Of course I would." And so I kind of took the lead, and I told her, we noticed such a difference between South Africa and here. We do not feel nervous. We do not feel tense. What's going on? And she laughed and she said, "You are not the first one to mention that." Yeah, we do not have the problems that South Africa has had. We had no apartheid. We pretty much have all kind of gotten along. And so I said, "Why? What is the reason? Why?" And she said, "I think it was our government. We have a king. It is a monarchy. It's a constitutional monarchy. We do have elections for a parliament and that kind of stuff, but the king retains a certain amount of power and has for a long time. He welcomed the white population came in. He saw them as bringing in money and investment and know-how. So he welcomed them, but there was never enough white people here to attempt an overthrow or anything like that. They were made feel welcome. They did not feel afraid. We had good, strong leadership from our king and simply never had the problems that South Africa had. Does this support the great man theory of history? Kind of sounds like it, doesn't it? Okay, let's take I'm just going to mention Madagascar out here. Everybody knows where Madagascar is because, was it Disney? Somebody made a movie about Madagascar. A bunch of little animals or something go to Madagascar. I guess I haven't watched it, but I need to. So everybody knows where it is. It's the second largest island country in the world. What's the first? Yep, somebody said it, Australia. Madagascar is a fairly poor country. It's got about 26 million people in it. They do have a certain amount of mining. They've got the largest titanium deposits in the world there. But most of the economy is agricultural. They were in the news here recently. Vanilla, the largest source of natural vanilla is Madagascar. And there was other places were grown. They were having trouble getting the vanilla. And so the price of vanilla shot up. And in Madagascar, you had these vanilla pirates. They would basically sneak out in the middle of the night to these little vanilla farms and steal the crop. Vanilla, the beans about that long. And that's their cash crop. These small farmers that raise this stuff they started patrolling their fields at night, and they were arming themselves. And some of them were even going out to the vanilla beans and labeling, kind of etching into it, kind of tattooing into it their name, so that if somebody tried to steal their beans, they wouldn't be able to sell them on the market. It was kind of an interesting story. So anyway, that's Madagascar. Early days was famous for piracy. During World War II, the British fleet hid out there when the Japanese made an incursion into the Indian Ocean. A lot of tourism in Madagascar, which is something I've never heard of. I don't know anybody that's ever been to Madagascar, and I've never really had a great desire to go there. But apparently there are a bunch of people that do like to go there. Apparently most of them come from Asia, or maybe the wealthy from Africa. So, all right, so those are the 5 countries we've got down in the south. We've got Madagascar over here, Zimbabwe, Eswatini, Lesotho, and South Africa. Be studying those, get to know where everything is in Africa. Those are the last countries we're going to look at in Africa. Next lecture, I'll talk just a little bit about sub-Saharan African culture, and that will wrap up what we're going to do with Africa. So, hey, have a great day. See you around campus.